So, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard a lot of prating and prattling about this being the age of specialization. I'm a carpenter by trade. At one time I could build a house, a barn, a church, or a chicken coop. But I seen the need of a specialist in my line, so I studied her. I got her. She's mine, gentlemen. You are face to face with the champion privy builder of Essex County. Bob Livingston was my first customer. He heard about me specializing and decided to take a chance, and I built for him just the average 8-family 3-holder. With that job, my reputation was made, and since then, I have devoted all my time and thought to that special line. Of course, when business is slack, I do a little paper hanging on the side, but my heart is just in privy building. And when I finish a job, I ain't through. I give all my customers 6 months privy service free gratis. I explained this to Bob, and one day he calls me up and says, "Lem, I wish you'd come out here. I'm having privy trouble." So I gets in the car and drives out to Bob's place and hid behind them Baldwins, that's a type of apple tree, where I could get a good view of the situation. It was right in the middle of haying time, and them hired hands was going in there more often than some of the cubs here go off to the loo, to the bathroom. And they were staying in there anywheres from 40 minutes to an hour. Think of that. I says, "Bob, you sure have got privy trouble?" So I takes out my kit of tools and goes in to examine the structure. First I looks at the catalog hanging there, thinking it might be that, but it wasn't even from a recognized house. I bet you don't know what the catalog was for. Then I looks at the seats proper, and I see what the trouble was. I had made them holes too darn comfortable. So I gets out a scroll saw and cuts them square with hard edges. Then I go back and takes up my position as before. Me here, the Baldwins here, and the privy there. And I watched them hired hands going in and out for nearly 2 hours. Not one of them was staying more than 4 minutes. "Bob," I says, "I've solved her. That's what comes of being a specialist." 'Twarn't long after I built that twin job for the schoolhouse, and then after that the biggest plant up to date, an 8-holder. Elmer Ridgeway was down and looked it over, and he comes to me one day and says, "Lem, I seen that 8-hole job you done down there at the corners, and it sure is a dandy. And figuring as how I'm going to build on the old Robinson property, I thought I'd ask you to kind of estimate on a job for me." "You come to the right man, Elmer," I says. "I'll be out as soon as I get the roof on the 2-seater I'm putting up for the sheriff." A couple of days later, I drives out to Elmer's place, getting there about dinner time. I knocks a couple of times on the door, and I see they got a lot of folks to dinner, so not wishing to disturb them, I just sneaks around to the side door and yells, "Hey, Elmer, here I am. Where do you want that privy put?" Elmer comes out, we get to talking about a good location. He was all for putting her right alongside a jagged path running by a big northern spy. That's another kind of apple tree. "You wouldn't do it, Elmer," I says, "and I'll tell you why. In the first place, her being near a tree is bad. There ain't no sound in nature so disconcerting as the sound of apples dropping on the roof. Then another thing, there's a crooked path running by that tree, and the soil there ain't adapted to absorbing moisture. During the rainy season, she's likely to be slippery. Take your grandpappy. Going out there is about the only recreation he gets. He'll go out some rainy night with his nighties flapping around his legs, and like as not, when you come out in the morning, you'll find him prone in the mud, or maybe skidded off one of them curves and wound up in the corn crib. No, sir," I says, "put her in a straight line with the house, and if it's all the same to you, have her go past the woodpile. I'll tell you why. Takes a woman, for instance. Out she goes. On the way back, she'll gather 5 sticks of wood, and the average woman will make 4 or 5 trips a day. There's 20 sticks in the wood box without any trouble. On the other hand, take a timid woman. If she sees any menfolk around, she's too bashful to go out direct, so she'll go out to the woodpile, pick up the wood, go back to the house, and watch her chance. The average timid woman, especially a new hired girl, I've known to make as many as 10 trips to the woodpile before she goes in, regardless. On a good day, you'll have your wood box filled by noon, and right there is a saving of time. Now about the digging of her. You can't be too careful about that, I says. Dig her deep and dig her wide. It's a mighty sight better to have a little privy over a big hole than a big privy over a little hole. Another thing, when you dig her deep, you've got her dug, and you ain't got that disconcerting thought stealing over you that sooner or later you'll have to dig again. And when it comes to construction, I says, I can give you joists or beams. Joists make a good job. Beams cost a bit more, but they're worth it. Beams, you might say, will last forever. Of course, I could give you joists, but take your Aunt Emmy, she ain't getting a mite lighter. Someday she might be out there when them joists give way, and there she'd be, catched. Another thing you've got to figure on, Elmer, I says, is that Oddfellows picnic in the fall. Them boys is going to get in there in 4s and 6s, singing and drinking and the like, and I want to tell you there's nothing breaks up an Oddfellows picnic quicker than a digging party. Beams, I say, every time, and rest secure. And about her roof, I says, I can give you a lean-to type or a pitch roof. Pitch roofs cost a little more, but some of our best people has lean-tos. If it was for myself, I'd have a lean-to, and I'll tell you why. A lean-to has 2 less corners for the wasps to build their nests in. And on a hot August afternoon, there ain't nothing so disconcerting as a lot of wasps buzzing around while you're sitting there doing a little reading, figuring, or thinking. Another thing, I says, a lean-to gives you a high door. Take that son of yours shooting up like a weed. Don't any of him seem to be turning under. If he was trying to get under a pitch roof, he'd crack his head every time. Take a lean-to, Elmer. They ain't stylish, but they're practical. Now about her furnishings. I can give you a nail or a hook for the catalog. And besides, a box for cobs. I bet you don't know what the cobs are for either. You take your pa, for instance. He's of the old school, and naturally he'd prefer the box. So put them both in, Elmer. It won't cost you a bit more for the box, and keeps peace in the family. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, I says. And as long as we're on furnishings, I'll tell you about a technical point that was put to me the other day. The question was this: what is the life, or how long will the average mail-order catalog last in just a plain ordinary 8-family 3-holder? Stumped me for a spell, but this being a reasonable question, I checked up and found that by placing the catalog in there, say in January when you get your new one, you should be into the harness section by June, but of course that ain't through Apple time and not counting on too many city visitors either. And another thing, they've been putting so many of those stiff-colored sheets in the catalog here lately that it makes it hard to figure. Something really ought to be done about this, and I thought about taking it up with Mr. Sears Roebuck himself. As to the latch for her, I can give you a spool and string or a hook and eye. The cost of a spool and string is practically nothing, but they ain't positive in action. If somebody comes out and starts rattling the door, either the spool or the string is apt to give way, and there you are. But with a hook and eye, she's yours, you might say, for the whole afternoon, if you're so minded. Put on the hook and eye of the best quality, because there ain't nothing that'll rack a man's nerves more than to be sitting there pondering without a good, strong, substantial latch on the door. And he agreed with me. Now, I says, what about windows? Some want them, some don't. They ain't so popular as they used to be. If it was me, Elmer, I'd say no windows, and I'll tell you why. Take, for instance, somebody coming out, maybe they're just in a hurry, or maybe they waited too long. If the door don't open right away, and you don't answer them, 9 times out of 10, they'll go round and look in the window, and you don't get the privacy you ought to. Now, about ventilators, or the designs I cut in the doors. I can give you stars, diamonds, or crescents. There ain't much choice. All give good service. A lot of people like stars because they throw a ragged shadow. Others like crescents because they're graceful and simple. Last year we was cutting a lot of stars, but this year people are kind of quieting down and running more to crescents. I do cut twine and hearts now and then for young married couples, and bunches of grapes for the newly rich. These 2 last designs come under the heading of novelties, and I don't very often suggest them because it takes time and runs into money. I wouldn't take any snap judgment on our ventilators, Elmer, I says, because they got a lot to do with the beauty of the structure. And don't overdo it like Doc Turner did. He wanted stars and crescents both against my better judgment, and now he's sorry. But it's too late, because when I cut them, they're cut, and gentlemen, you get mighty tired sitting day after day looking at a ventilator that ain't to your liking. Now, I says, how do you want the door to swing, opening in or out? He said he didn't know. So I says it should open in. This is the way it works out. Place yourself in there, the door opening in, say about 45 degrees. This gives you air and lets the sun beat in. Now, if you hear anybody coming, you can give it a quick shove with your foot, and there you are. But if she swings out, where are you? You can't run the risk of having her open for air or sun, because if anyone comes, you can't get up off that seat, reach way around and grab without getting caught now, can you? He could see I was right. So I built his door like all my doors, swinging in and of course facing east, to get the full benefit of the sun. And I tell you, gentlemen, there ain't nothing more restful than to get out there in the morning comfortably seated with the door about 3/4 open. The old sun beating down on you sort of relaxes the body, makes you feel mighty, mighty restful. Now, I says, about the paint number, what color do you want her, Elmer? He said red. Elmer, I says, I can paint her red, and red makes a beautiful job, or I can paint her bright green, or any one of half a dozen other colors. But they're all mighty pretty, but it ain't practical to use a single solid color, and I'll tell you why. She's too darn hard to see at night. You need contrast, just like they use on them railroad crossing bars, so you can see them in the dark. If I was you, I'd paint her bright red with white trimmings, just like your barn. Then she'll match up nice in the daytime, and you can spot her easy at night when you ain't got much time to go scouting around. There's a lot of fine points to putting up a first-class privy that the average man don't think about. It's no job for amateur. Take my word for it, there's a whole lot more to it than you can see by just taking a few squints at your neighbors. Why, one of the worst tragedies around here in years was because old man Clark's boys thought they knowed something about this kind of work, and they didn't. I think one of them was named Tim. Old man Clark, if he's a day, he's 97, lives over there across the holler with his boys, asked me to come over and estimate on their job. My price was too high, so they decided to do it themselves, and that's where the trouble begun. I was doing a little paper hanging at the time for that widder that lives down past the old creamery. As I'd drive by, I could see the boys a-working. Of course, I didn't want to butt in, so used to just holler at him on the way by and say neighborly like, "Hey boys, see you're doing a little building." You see, I didn't want to act like I was butting in on their work, but I knowed all the time that they was going to have trouble with that privy, and they did. From all outside appearances, it was a regulation job, but not being experienced along this line, they didn't anchor her. You see, I put a 4x4 that runs from the top right straight down 5 foot into the ground. That's why you never see any of my jobs upset Halloween night. They might pull them out, but they'll never upset them. Here's what happened. They didn't anchor theirs, and they painted it solid red. Two bad mistakes. Halloween night come along, darker than pitch. Old man Clark was out in there. Some of them devilish neighbor boys was out for no good, and they upset her with the old man in it. Of course, the old man got to calling, and his boys heard the noise. One of them says, "What's that racket? Somebody must be at the chickens." So they took the lantern, started out to the chicken shed. They didn't find anything wrong there, and they started back to the house. Then they heard the dog bark, and one of the boys says, "Sounds like that barking is over toward the privy." It being painted red, they couldn't see. She was upset, so they started over there. In the meantime, the old man had gotten so confused that he started to crawl out through the hole, yelling for help all the time. The boys recognized his voice and come running, but just as they got there, he lost his holt and fell. After that, they just called. They didn't go near him. So, you see what a tragedy that was, and they tell me he has been practically ostracized from society ever since. Well, time passed, and I finally got Elmer's job done, and gentlemen, everybody says that next to my 8-holer, it is the finest piece of construction work in the county. Sometimes when I get to feeling blue and thinking I hitched my wagon to the wrong star, and maybe I should have took up chiropractic or veterinary, I just pack the little woman and the kids in the back of my car and start out aiming to fetch up at Elmer's place along about dusk. When we gets to the top of the hill overlooking his place, we stops. I slips the gear in mutual, and we just sit there looking at that beautiful sight. There sits that privy on that knoll near the woodpile, painted red and white. Morning glory's growing up over her, and Mr. Sun bathing her in a burst of yeller color as he drops back of them hills. You can hear the dog barking in the distance, bringing the cows up for milking, and the slow squeak of Elmer's windmill pumping away day after day, the same as me. As I look at that beautiful picture of my work, I'm proud. I heaves a sigh of satisfaction. My eyes fill up, and I says to myself, folks are right when they say that next to my 8-holer, that's the finest piece of construction work I ever done. I know I done right in specializing. I'm sitting on top of the world, and I hope that boy of mine who is growing up like a weed keeps up the good work when I'm gone. With one last look as we pulls away, I slips my arm around the missus and I says, Nora, Elmer don't have to worry. He's a boy that's got hisself a privy, a mighty, mighty pretty privy. Thank you, gentlemen. And now sit tight and listen for taps. Yawa. Now remember, you go just as quietly as you came.